I was standing completely still outside my mother's sitting room when I heard the words that turned my entire future to ash. My mother, Vivienne Carter, a woman who built her identity on keeping up appearances in Houston's black medical elite, a woman who wore her sorority pin like a badge of rank and treated every dinner party like a military operation, was having a private conversation with my fiancé, Derek. I had just come downstairs to show them both the fabric swatches I'd chosen for my bridesmaids' dresses. Instead, I heard my mother's voice, low and deliberate, telling the man I had loved for 4 years that he was making the single biggest mistake of his life by marrying me. She told him that my best friend, Simone, came from the right kind of family, that Simone understood how to conduct herself in rooms that mattered, that Simone had the temperament of a woman who would build a man up rather than pull his focus sideways. She said Simone was a natural fit for someone with Derek's ambitions, a cardiovascular surgeon on the path to department chief, a man who needed a wife who understood the social architecture of hospital politics, not a woman who stayed up until 2 in the morning sketching blueprints for buildings that might never get built. Then she called me difficult, willful. She said I had no interest in making myself easy to love. My hand pressed flat against the cool plaster of the hallway wall. I held my breath and waited for Derek to say something. I waited for him to tell my mother that I was the woman he had chosen. That 4 years of building a life together meant more than a dinner party seating chart. That my architectural career, the one I had fought to establish from nothing, was not a hobby, it was the thing that made me who I was. Derek didn't say any of that. He laughed, a soft, accommodating sound I had heard him use with difficult clients, and said that he and Simone had actually already had a conversation, that the transition, as he called it, could be handled quietly, that he hoped I would eventually understand. I didn't move. I didn't push open the door. I walked back upstairs with a steadiness that surprised even me, packed a single carry-on bag with my laptop and my portfolio drives, left my engagement ring on the bathroom counter, and walked out of the house where I had grown up. I drove to the airport that same night and bought a one-way ticket to London. I want you to understand something, because I know some of you have been in a room exactly like that hallway frozen, listening to people you love negotiate your value like it was a line item on a balance sheet. I am not telling you this story so you can feel sorry for me. I am telling you this story so you can feel what it feels like when every single one of them turns out to be completely wrong about you. The betrayal didn't come out of nowhere, and looking back, I can trace its roots to one specific evening about 6 weeks before I found myself in that hallway. My parents had hosted what my mother called an intimate gathering, which in her vocabulary meant 40 people in a house decorated within an inch of its life, every surface carrying either fresh lilies or framed photographs of family accomplishments. My father, Dr. Raymond Carter, a retired cardiothoracic surgeon himself, sat at the head of the table with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 30 years being the most important person in every room. My mother moved through the house like a general inspecting troops. I arrived straight from a site visit, still in my work clothes, wide-leg trousers, a structured blazer, my natural hair in a twist-out that I had spent exactly no time worrying about. I had a presentation the next morning for a community health clinic. I was designing pro bono on the east side of the city, and my mind was still half occupied with the load-bearing question my structural engineer had flagged that afternoon. My mother intercepted me at the front door. She looked at my hair the way other people look at a stain. She pulled me aside and explained, in the tone she used for things she considered self-evident, that I looked unprofessional, that the partners' wives would be there, that Derek's department head was coming, and first impressions in these settings compound over years. She suggested I run upstairs and flat iron my hair before anyone saw me. I told her my hair was fine. She looked at me for a long moment and said, very quietly, that I had always been my own worst obstacle. I sat through dinner at the far end of the table, next to an elderly cousin nobody had thought to introduce. The conversation around the main cluster of guests orbited Derek's recent surgical outcomes, my father's legacy at the hospital, and the news that my sister's husband Marcus, a hospital administrator with a sharp smile and an instinct for attaching himself to powerful people, had been appointed to the board of a regional medical foundation. At some point, Marcus decided to use me as a punchline. He asked, loudly enough for the table to pause, whether I was still doing my little design projects. He said the phrase little design projects the way people say it when they mean something they believe will eventually embarrass you into quitting. He mentioned, helpfully, that the commercial real estate market was contracting and that architecture was a field with an unusually high rate of firm closures in the first 5 years. I told him, in the same calm voice I use with contractors who underestimate me, that I had just been shortlisted for a federal infrastructure design grant worth $2.3 million, that my firm's pro bono clinic project had been picked up by 2 regional outlets, that I was, in fact, doing quite well. Marcus smiled at Derek the way men do when they're sharing a private joke at a woman's expense. Derek smiled back. It was barely a second. If you had been watching from across the room, you might have missed it entirely. But I saw it, and I felt the temperature of something inside me drop several degrees. Then Simone arrived. She swept in 40 minutes late, which my mother not only forgave but seemed to consider charming, and she brought a bottle of wine that made my father's eyes light up in a way mine never had. She wore a silk-wrapped dress in a deep burgundy, and she moved through the room the way certain women do when they have understood from an early age that every room is a stage. She sat down next to Derek, touched his arm when she laughed, and held my mother's full attention for the rest of the evening. I watched my mother lean toward Simone with the warmth she had never once directed at my career, my choices, or my hair. I watched Derek watch Simone. The evening didn't break anything. It just revealed what had already been broken. The nights that followed were an education in a particular kind of dread, the kind that lives in small things. A text message from Derek that took 4 hours to arrive. A dinner canceled because of a work obligation that Simone later mentioned, without realizing she had also attended. A $3,400 charge on our shared account at a jewelry boutique we had never been to together. When I asked him about the charge, Derek told me it was a gift for a colleague's wife. He said it so easily, looking at his phone while he spoke, that I almost believed him. Then he sighed and said I had a habit of turning small things into evidence of something larger, and that this tendency of mine was honestly exhausting. He made me feel like the problem. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house under the pretense of dropping off some centerpiece samples for my mother's annual spring luncheon. What I was really looking for was confirmation, some sign that my instincts weren't just anxiety, that the dread had a foundation. The house was quiet when I let myself in. The lights in the main rooms were off, but there was a warm line of light under the door of my mother's sitting room, the room she used for conversations she didn't want overheard. I stopped outside it. And I heard everything. My mother, Derek, voices so unhurried and businesslike they could have been discussing a property transfer. My mother said that someone with Derek's trajectory couldn't afford to be anchored to a woman who didn't understand the assignment. She said Simone had the grace, the pedigree, and the instinct for this kind of life. She said I had always been too invested in my own agenda to be a genuine partner to someone else's success. Derek said he agreed. He said he cared about me, genuinely, but he said caring about someone and building a future with them were 2 different calculations. He said Simone understood the world he was moving into in a way I never had and probably never would. He said they had already spoken carefully, but clearly, and that he thought a mutual, quiet separation handled before the invitations went out was the cleanest solution. My mother called it the right call. I stood in that hallway with my hand flat against the wall and felt something in my chest go still and cold and extremely clear. I did not kick the door open. I did not give them the screaming scene they would have been able to frame as proof that I was, as they had always implied, too emotional, too volatile, too much. I walked back upstairs to my old bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the framed architecture school graduation photo on the dresser, the one where I was grinning because I had graduated with honors and a job offer in hand, and I believed, with my whole chest, that the people in my life were proud of me. Then I took off my engagement ring, set it on the bathroom counter, picked up my bag, and left. I drove to the airport. I bought a one-way ticket to London. I did not leave a note. I did not send a text. The silence was the only thing I had that was fully mine, and I intended to use it. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are thinking, why London? Why not stay and fight? I have thought about this too, and here is the truest answer I have. I wasn't running away from them. I was running toward the only version of my life that didn't require me to shrink. I had a contact in London, a former professor who had relocated to run an urban design consultancy out of Shoreditch. She had offered me a freelance role twice, and twice I had turned it down because Derek's schedule didn't accommodate an international move. I called her from the terminal. She said yes before I finished the sentence. The first year in London nearly broke me in every way that has nothing to do with the people who hurt you. I sublet a room in a flat in Peckham from a Jamaican-British woman named Donna, who made the best jerk chicken I have ever eaten, and who charged me £40 a week for the room because she said she could tell I was someone going through something real. The flat was small and loud, and the boiler worked when it felt like it. I worked 14 hours a day on my laptop at the kitchen table while Donna watched her shows in the next room. My mother called 11 times in the first month. I did not answer. My sister called once, and when I saw her name, I set the phone face down and let it ring out. Derek texted 3 times. The first 2 messages were about logistics. The third was a single line that said, "I hope you're okay." I deleted all 3. I poured every hour I had into the work. I designed a proposal for a mixed-use affordable housing development in East London that my professor's firm entered into an open commission process. We didn't win. We got an honorable mention and a note from the selection committee that the concept was among the most innovative they had reviewed. I took that note and built on it for 6 more months until the concept was airtight. I submitted it independently to a European design competition the following spring. I won, not the honorable mention category, the main prize. The prize came with a platform, and the platform came with introductions, and one of those introductions, at a design industry reception in a converted warehouse near King's Cross, was to a man named Julian Ibarra. Julian was Nigerian-British. He ran a private development group that specialized in building climate-resilient infrastructure across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. He was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are entirely comfortable with their own weight in a room. He asked me 3 questions about the load-bearing methodology in my competition-winning proposal, not to challenge me, but because he had clearly read every word of it and wanted to understand how I had gotten there. Nobody had ever asked me questions like that before. Not like that. We talked for 2 hours. He bought me a coffee from the reception table, not a drink, a coffee, because I had mentioned offhand that I was trying to stay sharp. He listened when I spoke. He did not redirect the conversation toward himself. He did not mention, once, what kind of wife an architect would make. He said my mind was extraordinary. He said it simply, the way you state a fact, and then moved on to the next question, and I had to look away for a moment because my eyes were doing something embarrassing. Over the next 2 years, Julian became my most important professional collaborator, and then my most important person. He did not rush either of those transitions. He gave me space to build my firm on my own terms, offered resources when I asked for them, and stepped back when I didn't. And he never once made me feel that my success was something I owed him credit for. The firm grew. We designed a pediatric health clinic in Nairobi that won an International Humanitarian Architecture Award. We secured a federal contract in the UK for sustainable school construction. My name began appearing in industry publications. I kept my profile deliberately quiet in the United States. I did not give interviews to American outlets. I used my professional name Zoe Ibarra after we married on a small beach outside Lagos with 12 people we actually loved rather than my birth name of Zoe Carter. My social media presence was minimal and architecture-focused. No personal content, no location tags. I had been removed from my family's narrative for so long that they assumed I had simply dissolved. They thought I had failed quietly somewhere across the ocean. They had no idea. The letter from my sister Diane arrived on a Thursday morning, forwarded through 3 layers of professional contact before it finally reached my London office email. Diane was 2 years younger than me and had spent most of our lives functioning as my mother's loyal lieutenant. The email was written in the voice my mother used when she was pretending to be casual, all-surface warmth and no real heat. She said the family was throwing our father a retirement gala. She said it would be held at the most prestigious event venue in Houston's medical district. She said it would be attended by hospital board members, city officials, former colleagues, and notable figures from the Houston philanthropic community. Then she got to the real content. She said she hoped I had landed on my feet somewhere, that the European design market was notoriously difficult for Americans without institutional backing, and that if I was between opportunities, she hoped I wouldn't let pride get in the way of coming home. She mentioned that Derek had just been appointed chief of cardiovascular surgery, the youngest in the hospital's history. She attached a copy of the Houston Chronicle profile as a PDF, with a note that said she thought I would want to know. The profile had a photograph of Derek in his white coat, looking into the middle distance with the expression of a man who had arrived. Standing beside him, her hand on his arm, visibly pregnant and wearing a ring that I recognized from a $3,400 jewelry charge on a shared account, was Simone. Diane's email closed with the offer that if I couldn't afford a flight home, Marcus knew some people who worked in hospitality and could probably get me a discounted rate. I read the email twice. Then I laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your sternum, because Marcus, who had publicly mocked my design projects at a dinner table, I was now offering me a hospitality discount, while his wife's money was quietly bleeding out of a foundation account he didn't know I was aware of. I set my phone down on my desk and looked out the window at the gray London sky. Then I called Julian into my office, closed the door, and showed him the email. He read it carefully. He set the phone down. He looked at me. He said, "Do you want to go?" I said, "I want them to understand exactly who they decided I wasn't." Julian nodded once. Then he opened his laptop. Because here is what my family didn't know, and what I had spent 4 years building toward without ever consciously planning it as revenge. The Carter family's hospital, the institution my father had given his career to, the one Derek had just been crowned king of, was in financial crisis. The regional health network that owned it had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. They had been quietly seeking a major development partner to help restructure their real estate assets. The hospital campus, the attached medical office buildings, the land parcels that sat underdeveloped on the east side of the property. Julian's development group had been in preliminary conversations with the network's board for 8 months. The board's primary contact at the group was me. I had reviewed those property assessments myself. I had been to that campus. I had stood in the hospital lobby where my father had worked for 30 years, wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard, and nobody had recognized me because nobody had been looking. I was the one who decided whether the partnership moved forward. I replied to Diane's email with a single line confirming my attendance. Then I told Julian to instruct our development team in Houston to move forward with the site visit scheduling, and to let the hospital network board know that the group's principal partner would be present at the gala to discuss next steps. We flew into Houston on a Friday evening. I wore a dress I had bought in Milan, a deep forest green, understated, the kind of dress that costs more than most people's car payments and announces nothing. My hair was out, full, exactly as it grew from my head. Julian wore a dark navy suit that had been made for him in Lagos, and he walked into rooms the way men do when they have never once doubted their right to be in them. We arrived separately, by design. I walked into the gala alone. The ballroom of the medical district venue was everything my mother had always loved: high ceilings, candlelight, round tables with white linens, the kind of floral arrangements that cost more than some people's monthly rent. The guest list was exactly as Diane had described. Hospital board members, politicians, the whole architecture of Houston's Black professional elite, all gathered to celebrate my father's life's work. My mother found me within 4 minutes. She looked at my dress with the calculating speed of a woman who had spent 50 years reading rooms through fabric and labels, and I watched her face do the quick arithmetic of no recognizable brand and land, incorrectly, on budget. She said it was surprising that I had made it. She said the European job market must have finally settled down. She said I looked tired. I told her she looked wonderful. Diane materialized at her elbow, her smile the tight, bright kind that means she was enjoying herself. She said Julian must not have been able to make it. She said, long-distance professional partnerships must be hard to maintain. She said she hoped things were stable for me. I said things were very stable, thank you. Then Simone drifted over, radiant in the maternity gown of a woman who believed she had won every competition worth entering. She touched her belly with one hand the way people do when they want you to notice. She said it was so good to see me. She said I was so brave for coming. She asked, with the warmth of a knife, whether I was seeing anyone. I said I was married, actually. A brief silence. Simone said she hadn't heard that. She said congratulations. I said thank you. Then I excused myself and went to find my seat. My seat was at table 14. It was positioned directly beside the kitchen service entrance, at the furthest possible remove from the central table where my father, my mother, Derek, Simone, Diane, and Marcus were seated under the full wash of the chandelier light. The table assignment was not accidental. I knew my mother's event architecture too well for that. She had placed me in the corner where the help came and went, close enough to observe the family's triumph, and far enough away to be clearly excluded from it. I sat down. I ordered a sparkling water. I smoothed my dress over my knees and watched the room. Derek moved through the gala like a man in the middle of his own highlight reel. He shook hands with board members, accepted congratulations on his appointment, touched the small of Simone's back in the proprietary way of a man who has traded up and wants the room to know it. He had not seen me yet. Marcus came by my table before the speeches began. He crouched beside my chair in the confidential manner of a man who believes he is being generous. He said he had heard I was doing some freelance work overseas. He said that was impressive, really, for someone without institutional backing. He said if I ever wanted to come back to the States, he had a friend who was hiring for a junior position at a mid-size firm downtown. Nothing glamorous but steady work, and he could put in a word. I looked at Marcus. I said I appreciated that, and that I would keep it in mind. He patted my shoulder and went back to the main table. My phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from Julian. Lobby, 2 minutes. I typed back one word. Ready. The speeches began. My father stood at the podium, silver-haired and composed, and spoke about legacy and sacrifice and the particular joy of watching the people you have shaped go on to exceed you. He thanked the hospital board. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked my mother, whose vision and grace, he said, had made everything possible. He mentioned Derek by name as the embodiment of everything this family had worked toward: discipline, excellence, the willingness to make the hard choices that real success demands. His gaze moved briefly toward the shadows near the kitchen entrance where I sat. He moved on without pausing. Derek stood when invited and spoke with the fluency of a man who had been practicing this speech in the mirror. He said this family had shown him what it meant to build something that lasts. He said he was grateful to stand on the shoulders of giants. He said the next chapter was going to be historic, and he was pleased to announce that the Hospital Network Board had been in advanced negotiations with one of the premier international development groups in the world, and that tonight, they expected to finalize the partnership that would secure the institution's future for the next 50 years. The room applauded. Derek raised his champagne glass and said he was honored to welcome, tonight, the principal partner of the Ibarra Development Group, a visionary whose work was transforming healthcare infrastructure across 3 continents. He gestured toward the main doors of the ballroom, and Julian walked in. Julian did not hurry. He moved through the door with the unhurried ease of a man who understood that the room would wait. He was flanked by 2 members of our development team and our lead legal counsel, all carrying document cases. The candlelight caught the fine lines of his suit and the clean, quiet confidence of his face. Every head in the room turned. I watched Derek's smile hold for exactly 3 seconds before something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of confusion, because Julian was not looking at him. Julian was not looking at the board members who were already rising from their seats to intercept him. Julian was not looking at my father or my mother or any of the important people gathered under the light of the chandelier. Julian was looking at me. He walked directly across the ballroom. He did not stop at the main table. He did not acknowledge the hand my father's colleague extended in his direction. He walked past the floral arrangements and the champagne service and the carefully designed center of the room, and he came directly to table 14, beside the kitchen entrance, where I was sitting with my sparkling water and my forest green dress and my hair exactly as God intended it. He stood before me and extended his hand. I took it and stood. He brought my hand to his lips, not performatively, not for the room, but with the quiet deliberateness of a man who wanted to be clear, and he said, in a voice that carried in the sudden silence, Sorry to keep you waiting. You're right on time, I said. Then I turned to face the room. I want to tell you what I saw on their faces because I need you to understand that this was not a fantasy. This was real. This happened. Derek's champagne glass was still raised. He had not yet lowered it. His face had gone the particular shade that skin goes when blood drains out of it all at once. Simone's hand had stopped moving on her stomach. My mother's chin was up, but her eyes were doing something I had never seen them do in my entire life. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table. My father was the last to understand, and when he did, he sat down very slowly, as if his legs had decided independently to stop working. Julian kept his hand in mine and looked at the hospital board members who were now standing awkwardly between the main table and table 14, unsure of which direction to move. He addressed them directly, pleasantly, with the authority of a man who had closed 50 deals and never raised his voice to do it. He thanked them for the invitation. He said the Abara Group had been grateful for months of productive preliminary conversations. He said, however, that after a thorough internal review of the partnership terms and a very personal review of certain information that had come to light, the group had decided to withdraw from the negotiation. The room went the kind of quiet that only happens when everyone understands that something irrevocable has just occurred. Derek found his voice first. He said there must be a misunderstanding. He said the terms had been agreed. He said they had been in communication for months. Julian said he was sorry for any confusion. He said the decision was final. Then he looked at Derek for exactly 1 second, not with anger, not with contempt, just with the polite, mild regard of a man who is looking at something small, and then he looked back at me. I looked at my mother. I said, quietly enough that only the people closest to us could hear. You told him I didn't know how to be easy to love. I want you to know that I found someone who never needed me to be. Then I placed my hand in the crook of Julian's arm, and we walked out of that ballroom together, through the main doors, past the floral arrangements and the champagne service, and every face that had once decided what I was worth. The doors closed behind us. The rest came quickly, the way consequences always do when the foundation was rotten to begin with. Without the development partnership, the hospital network's restructuring stalled. The financial exposure that the board had been hoping to paper over with the infusion of capital became impossible to conceal. The story reached the Houston Business Journal within 6 weeks. Marcus's role in misrepresenting the network's asset valuations to attract investor interest became part of a subsequent regulatory inquiry. Derek, who had built his entire professional ascent on the assumption that the institution would remain a stable platform, found himself standing on sand. Simone, who was practical above all else, made her own calculations. Diane sent me one more email, 6 months later. It was 3 sentences long. It said that she hoped I was well. It said that things had been difficult. It said she thought about our childhood sometimes. I read it. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because there was simply nothing left to say that the truth hadn't already said more clearly than I ever could. I am telling you this from my office in London on a Tuesday morning, with the gray light coming through the windows and a set of blueprints for a maternal health center in a cross spread across my drafting table. Julian is in a call in the next room. I can hear his voice, steady and calm, the way it always is. I want to say this to you directly, the way I wish someone had said it to me when I was standing in that hallway with my hand against the wall. The people who decide you are too much, too difficult, too focused on the wrong things, they are not seeing you clearly. They are seeing the version of you that is most convenient for their story. And the moment you stop trying to fit into their story, something extraordinary happens. You get to write your own. If you have ever had to leave a room or a city or a country to find out what you were actually capable of, I want to hear from you. Tell me about it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. When the people who were supposed to champion you decide instead to diminish you, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Zoe didn't win by becoming someone her family would finally approve of. She won by becoming more completely herself. The right people, the right work, the right life, none of it found her until she stopped making herself small enough to fit inside someone else's expectations.